right, guys, welcome to the episode of Close and Conquer. I have my favorite guest so far, and I'm going to tell you why. First of all, Judge Jeanine, thank you for being here, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Because you talked about climbing like the same ladder, and ever since I've heard you talk about anything, I've always craved the truth. I want direction. I want honesty. I want transparency, even if it hurts. That's what I want. I was at a fundraiser yesterday for a coach of mine who passed away, and his wife was there. And she said, God, when's the last time you saw John? I said, oh, long time ago. He passed away from cancer. He beat cancer a few different times. She said, she paused. I said, hard ass, tough, honest. He changed my life in 2 short years. So I've loved watching what you've done. So I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Well, I want to start with, most people know you. Most people know who you are. They've heard you talk. I'd love, though, for our guests, to give you an idea who we get on here for the most part. It's a lot of men and women that are trying to find a way to provide more for their families. It's very much a business-minded, entrepreneurial, independent contractor. I might got my job during the day, but man, it's a hard time right now for me to it's really hard. Very few people that I've ever met have their finger on the pulse like you do or talk the way you speak about it. But for the men and women that are watching us, could you talk to them about why they should be excited about being a businessman or businesswoman, and then also what you think the hurdles are they're facing in America today in 2024?
Well, that's certainly a loaded question, and it's a lot. And I'm not sure that I have. No. Okay. I'm enjoying it. I mean, it's hard for me to tell people in business what it takes to win in business, which essentially is your question. All I know is what it takes to win. And what it takes to win is a belief in yourself, an honesty, and being genuine. Because if you're not genuine, the person you're dealing with, the audience, the public, whoever it is, they know it immediately. But being a success in business is more than just that. You've got to have the circumstances and a surrounding scenario that supports your being in business. And I'm kind of coming in at the back end of this as opposed to where you want the front end. The front end I'll go into is I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. I worked in a dairy when I was 14 years old. I had to get working papers to work. And my mother and father, my mother didn't work at home, but she was a model. She was stunningly beautiful. And my father worked in a business that my grandfather owned. Every day, when my dad drove me to school, he had the front end of a truck that he would pull trailers on. And I was always embarrassed, and I would always say, Dad, can you drop me off at the corner? And he would say, nope, we're going right up to school. And he would drop me off at school, and I'd kind of fall out of that big front of the truck. I don't know what it's called, Sean.
Okay.
Do you know what it is?
I do not know. I'm with you, but I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, but I'm kind of small,
visualize it. Yeah.
And I kind of just waited until my feet hit the ground. And he would drive me past, on the way to school, he would drive me past a place called the Elmira Correctional Facility. Okay. And he would talk about criminals and all the criminals who were locked up in that facility. And from the time I was very young, I always thought it was important that the criminals stay in jail. Little did I know that would ultimately contribute to my passion and who I would ultimately become, and the thing that I'm most proud of in my life. But when you talk about business, I'm going to jump now. When you talk about business, succeeding in business requires that you live in a country that supports you as a business person. And just today on the 5, I was talking about the fact that 4 years ago, inflation was at 1.4%. 4 years ago, gas was at $2. 4 years ago, consumer prices were 20% lower than they are now. And eggs didn't cost $7 and $8 a dozen. Yeah. How can you start a business in that setting? I don't have the answer for you. But what I do know is that you're getting involved in the politics of the world that you want to live in will determine whether or not you can be successful. Do you want to buy a house? People now can't buy houses. Young kids my children's age, they can't buy houses. They can't afford it. The interest rates are way too high. There's no way that they can support themselves and survive in this economy. Things have to change. And that means you get involved in politics. And a lot of young people think that politics is beyond their reach, that it's not going to make a difference. It makes every bit of a difference. And for young kids who are still living with their parents and they have kids, let's talk about school boards. Talk about what your kids are going to learn in school. Are they going to learn about some crazy stuff about when they can have sex or what their identity is? Or are they going to learn about reading, writing, and arithmetic, which is what's going to help them in business? You know, so my message, I guess, is that the politics that surround you can make it, they can accommodate your ability in being successful in business. And you tie into that your effort to be the best you can be, to be as honest as you can be, and to work hard. Now, when I was in law school, guys used to say you're taking a guy's place. You're only going to have kids, you're only going to be married, and you're going to drop out. And so I fought that every day in law school. I fought it when I got out of law school. When I went into the DA's office, they put me in the appeals bureau, because they didn't think that women could try cases. And that was my reality, that I was a woman, and therefore I couldn't, according to my boss, the DA, go for the jugular. Little did they know how much we could go for the jugular. But on my shoulders, as the first woman who tried a homicide case, who actually got out of the appeals bureau, because I was on law review in law school, it was important for me to succeed so that the women behind me could succeed as well. So I don't know how that fits in business, but I can tell you this. If I didn't believe in myself, and if I didn't seize opportunities, and you've got to be savvy enough to see an opportunity, and that means you think outside of the box. That means, Sean, that they tell you women don't try cases, and you tell yourself, yes, I can. So how did I do it? I was in the appeals bureau, and every day the guys and me would have lunch in the library. And so the guys who tried misdemeanor cases would come into the library during the week, and we'd eat our lunch at the desk. And one guy said, I don't want to handle the local court. He said, I got a hot date, and then another guy would say, I don't want to do the local court on Friday night. And so I went home that night and I thought to myself, these guys don't want to go out to the local court. They won't let me go out to the local court because I'm a woman. And maybe I can figure out a way where I can go out to the local court and we don't tell anybody, but I put their name on the file. So I come back the next day and I say, I remember Bob DeLascio, I remember him well. I said, hey, Bob, you know that hot date you have on Thursday? How about I go to the local court and do your calendar, and you can go out, and I'll put your name on the file, and no one will know any better. He said, good idea. He said, she may have an idea here. So I go, I think it was to Terrytown or somewhere in the outer villages in Westchester, and they said, your case is ready for trial. And I said, what case? They had a DWI case. I'd never tried a DWI. I had never been in a courtroom. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So I pick a jury, don't know what the heck I'm doing. And I try the case. I meet with the state trooper. He tells me what I need to know. He goes in and says, the guy's drunk. He blew this. The defendant didn't take the stand, thank God. And the jury returned the verdict at like 2 a.m. These are local courts. And I won the case. So I come back on Friday. I say, you didn't freaking tell me you had a jury trial. He said, oh, I forgot. How'd you do? I said, I won it. So the other guys are like, she won the case. So I tried their cases for a year.
Wow.
No one knew it. I put their names on the file until the chief assistant DA called me into his office. And he said to me, and you wouldn't remember this, but there's an actor, Peter Lorre. who did like really, and Edward G. Robinson, like from the 40s, and they were mean. So the chief assistant calls me up to his office. He's a combination of those two, and he's smoking a cigarette. He said, "Who the hell gave you a right to go to try cases?" And I said, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Fussell. I didn't mean to, but I just wanted to learn." He said, "And where the hell did you learn how to try a case?" And I remember I said, "Mr. Fussell, when I was in the appeals bureau, as I still was at that point, I read all your transcripts. You were the best trial attorney, and everything I learned from reading your transcripts."
Wow.
And he said to me, "You are one sly fox." And he moved me to the trial bureau. I made my own opportunity.
Wow.
I violated the rules, and I made a name for myself. And I was willing to do 2 jobs instead of just my day job in the appeals bureau. And I had to be prepared, and I had to be smart, and I also had to be a little secretive, which really wasn't very good. But it got me and the women behind me to try cases.
Sense. Well, that's, first of all, thank you. That is very, in business, now it's funny, I found sales by accident. I was a child protective services worker for 14 years. I worked with abused and neglected children.
Oh, gosh, we know this. We're in the same world.
I know. I read all that about you.
Yes.
And you know, that leads me to my next question, because people say, "Why did you become a social worker?" Well, I went to the police academy because my buddy dared me to go. And I'm like, I don't want to be a cop. Like, I'd been arrested a lot. I used to like to fight and get drunk and use drugs. I've been sober 24 hours. God, that'd be bad. 24 years. Connecticut. So I was born and raised in Connecticut. Been in Florida the last 5 years. I was in southeastern Connecticut, born in Norwich, which is not, if you know Connecticut, all that far from the casinos.
I live in Rye.
Okay.
Yeah.
So ways away, but I was in Norwich. And growing up, my mother did a really good job of keeping me away from things she didn't want me to see, right?
Yeah.
My grandmother, who kind of helped really raise me, a lot. My mom worked 3 jobs.
Yes.
Somebody asked me today if I could if I could have one more lunch with one person, who would it be? It would be my grandma, you know? And I went to my grandma's house one day, and she had 2 black eyes. And I was probably 15. And I said, "Grandma, what happened?" And this is how, I was saying naive, but I had never, and she started crying, and she said, "Ask your grandfather." So I was like, and then it flipped. My grandfather hit my grandmother. And I was like, I'm going to beat the living shit out of my grandfather, because that's what I'm going to do. And I didn't have a relationship with him, but I didn't know that. And then I went to confront my grandfather in a cowardly, but he pulled a gun out and pointed at me. And I was like, wow. So, I became a social worker because of a lot of stuff I went through as a kid, and I really appreciate everything you've done, because I didn't realize how much work you did with domestic violence.
Oh.
Because you seem to be very passionate about it, what brought you, because when people say to me, "Why did you be a social worker?" I was a social worker because I was trying to, first of all, the police academy, after 4 months, they were like, "Dude, you got to leave because you're really aggressive."
You would have been perfect. What are you talking about?
I would have been perfect until somebody came at me with a weapon, and then I reacted, and maybe it was too much, and then I'm calling somebody like you and being like, "Hey, I'm in trouble," and you're like, "You are in trouble." I'm like, "But I thought everybody was in trouble." Matter of fact, the truth, I was in the police academy, and I was out with my FTO, field training officer, and we were out before the academy was done. And there was an incident that was domestic violence. And I knocked on the door, really hard. My guy's like, "Calm down. It's okay. It's 4 p.m. Well, this guy came running out the door, and I tackled him because I assumed that he was the perpetrator.
He was the batterer.
But he wasn't.
Right.
He was the brother of the victim.
Ooh.
And they didn't, he was actually running. And I said, "You should be tackled. You were running from him and not protecting your sister. So that actually should be illegal."
What's a day without a rationalization?
Exactly.
I like
seemed
the way
good.
you think.
So can you talk to me about your background? How did you become such a champion? And how do you see today compared to when you started working with domestic violence laws?
That's an interesting question. How do I see today? I'll get to that. I was in the appeals bureau, right? Because I was law review in law school. So they put me in the appeals bureau. The best cases I got were homicide cases because I could look at the autopsy photos. I love to look at the photos. In fact, when I ultimately became the DA.
You love to look at the photos?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yes. When I became the DA, we'd have homicide review with my top lawyers, with the trial lawyers, career criminal lawyers, the homicide guys. And if they didn't have an autopsy photo, I'd say, go back to your office, come back when you have the photo.
Okay.
Those photos speak to you. They tell you what's happened. I'm in the Appeals Bureau. One of my first cases involved a woman who had been stabbed, I think it was 20 times, maybe 21 times. I may be wrong about that. She was young, and her name was Deborah Safian. I'll never forget it. And the issue on appeal was whether or not, when you try two co-defendants and they both have confessed, but one doesn't take the stand, if you lose your right to cross-examine the one who doesn't take the stand, does it prevent you from getting a fair trial? And the answer by the Court of Appeals in New York is no, if both of them basically confess the same thing. That isn't what stuck with me. And that made law in New York. What stuck with me was this young woman who had been stabbed so many times. The defendant was her husband. And I looked at her, and I looked at the stab wounds. She was beautiful. She was 27. She was young. She was in rigor mortis, obviously, and she had been cut up for the autopsy. But you could see that she was a young, vivacious woman. She had 2 little children. Her husband hired a kid who was 16 years old, and the kid wanted a motorcycle. And they went back and forth on how much money the husband would give the kid to get the motorcycle. The husband gave the kid $1,000. Kid buys a motorcycle to kill the wife. He shows him pictures of the wife, where she lives, where she works. And he gets on his motorcycle, he goes and he stabs her 21 times. It just stunned me because I came from a loving family. I didn't have any experiences that were odd. How could a man who said he loved a woman hire someone to kill her, much less kill a woman who was the mother of his 2 children? And it just stuck with me. And I realized that it wasn't a crime in New York to shoot, stab, beat, or brutalize your wife. It was only a crime if you murdered her. And in 1977, the law in New York changed. And they had concurrent jurisdiction, and I won't get into the weeds here, between family court and criminal court. And that's when I said, I want to champion this. I want to start a domestic violence unit in the DA's office. Well, the DA wasn't too happy with that, because for him it was social work. It was social work.
But it was crime. It was criminal.
Well, they had just made it a crime. And the police were used to saying, hey, you take a walk to the husband and tell the wife, go sleep at your mother's or whatever. It was considered a social problem, not a criminal justice problem. And as this young prosecutor, who was like so passionate about what I thought husbands and wives should be, then I realized what was going on in our society. I became one of 4 pilot projects by the Department of Justice, the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, and mine was the only one that survived. Police didn't want to know it. They thought every woman should be taken with a grain of salt, and on and on. And we changed it. And I worked with experts across the country. I then became someone who went around the country and proved that you could make these cases, you can make them a success. And how did I do it? The women always wanted to drop charges. Mm-hmm. So you had to think, how can I get her to not drop charges? I would say to them, look, this case is being brought in the name of the people of the state of New York. You are not the complainant. I am. The people are. You can't drop it. So every time he puts pressure on you, you tell him to come and talk to me. Okay? Because then I'll get you for filing a false statement. No, I would never do that.
Correct.
But I mean, you get it. You know what I had to do. Yeah. And then there would be cases where she would come in and she would be beat up. And then she'd drop the case. And then she'd be beat up again and drop the case. And then she'd get an order of protection and drop the case. So then what I would do, because the police would never arrest him again, I would write up an order of protection. I wasn't a judge, but I said, this is what I'm going to do. Pursuant to the laws of the state of New York, this man is to be arrested. Anytime this woman calls for help, charges will be filed immediately. Jeanine Pirro, Bureau Chief, Domestic Violence Bureau. They would hand it to the cops. They'd arrest him. So, one of the most fascinating cases involved a woman who was hammered almost to death and left on top of a building for dead. I said to her, "You're filing charges. I'm charging him with attempted murder." She said, "I love him." I'll let that go. She said, "I loved him." I said, "Great. I'm still prosecuting him." She ended up testifying for him.
For him?
For him. And I was able to convince the jury that she was in love with him, that all of the evidence was unmistakable, that when you took the totality of circumstances, they had no option other than conviction. And they convicted, even when she testified on his behalf.
Wow.
So I was able to go around the country to talk to cops. How do you get her to stay with it? You threaten her, but you never follow through with it. And you tell her that the case is brought by you, not her, and that no matter what, you will file charges. Because make no mistake, once he beats her, he's on to the next woman.
No doubt.
And once he starts beating her, he won't finish until he kills her. I could predict homicides. I could predict them, and the women in my office could. And I had a great staff of women. They wouldn't hire prosecutors, only social workers for me. Okay? So I ended up trying the cases. And I would go out from one jurisdiction to the next. And then when the DA had to cut the budget, where did he cut? He cut domestic violence. So then what I did was I jumped over him, and I went public, and I was like, I need the public's help. I had mental health people, social service people. I figured out what I needed to do to keep this unit. So it's not business, but it was my business.
Correct.
And I employed the media, television, newspapers. I talked about how horrific it was. I got women who had gone through with the charges, who ended the abuse. And I got churches, because churches are the ones who said marriage is forever, be a better wife. I got them to come out and say it has to stop.
Correct.
Somewhere it has to stop. So it's just about thinking while you're on your feet. And the difference today, when I was that young assistant DA, the vast majority of victims were women. Today, they're men as well as women. There were a few men back then. And I had a guy who was stabbed 3 times in the chest when he was sleeping. Mm-hmm. And she tried to kill him. And I brought him to the grand jury. And he basically said in the grand jury, well, she came at me and I threw her back. And then she came at, he gave a totally different story. Mm-hmm. And then I understood. Their ego was involved. And I had to be very, very
different
sensitive.
Deal.
Yeah.
Wow. I never, obviously, I became a social worker in 97, 98.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
But when some of the people who've been there for a long time talked about the law being different, and that's funny because they would say to me, now it's, when we go out, they say, we used to go out, and if she said, I'm good, we left.
Yeah.
And now it's like, no, it's a crime against, like the state of Connecticut will be, it doesn't matter. You don't have to press any charges. And to read about what you did and how much of a difference that made all over the country. Because for me,
it was 1978 that I did
that's what's crazy.
Yeah.
And just it was that fresh in their minds that many years later, because it took obviously some time. I mean, my first internship was working at a shelter.
Oh,
and my boss was this lady, Barb, who's sweetheart. Many, many years older than me. I'm sure God rest her soul, but she was an amazing human being. And I was doing my first class. I had a group of about 10 guys, and I'm 20 years old. And so they're going on. Now I'm 20. I'm immature. I'm angry. I was still drinking at the time, so I was probably hungover. Yeah. And I have all this baggage from my own childhood.
Yeah.
And all I'm thinking about is I want to knock every one of these guys out at the same time.
Yeah.
So this guy gets up and he starts popping off about how the woman got what she deserved.
Yeah.
And I said, well, hey, that makes sense. I said, my immature way. I said, why don't you and I, after this, talk out in a parking lot about what she deserved, and you can, come at me. So we get done with the group, and Barbara had been watching. She pulled me aside, and she said, when you emasculated him like that, who do you think he's going to take that out on when he gets home? And she said, you just put
her in danger.
Her in danger.
Yeah.
And I was shook. And you know what, though? I said at that moment in time, I can't do this.
Yeah.
It's not I can't. I'm never going to, I don't want to hurt, I don't want any woman to have their hands put on them ever because I washed away. Nope, I'm not going to. But I learned what I couldn't do what I couldn't do. That brings me to my next question, because you talk about politics. I admittedly have to tell you that I didn't pay much attention until probably about 8 years ago. I'm a businessman at my core. I was a social worker, but I was like, running construction out of my social work office. My boss is like, bro, what are you going to do? Like, eventually. Yeah. And I'm like, I have two jobs. I do really good at this. He's like, but you're going to have to go do your own thing. Yeah. And I've always said the country, in my opinion, for whatever I know, I see everything from a business lens, right? It's a big business. It's a massive business. There's huge expenses. It's a massive undertaking. So when more business people, because your experience has been very important to what you do and what you speak about, because you're not a lifelong politician in my mind. Like, you worked really hard to become who you are. And that means a lot to me. You said, and I agree with you, people need to get more involved, because when you start looking at interest rates, and I'll consult people all the time, they're like, what should I do in my company? I'm like, keep running it. Well, I want to sell it. I'm like, well, what do you think it's worth now with interest rates where they are?
Yeah, see, people don't understand.
You don't get that. Like, and you start going, like, when they're borrowing the money at this, and the private equity company gives this, and now all of a sudden your company's worth this compared to what it was worth before. Yeah. And it was worth that. I would not have sold my company in the last 3 years. I sold it when Trump was in office. I would have not sold it in the last 3 years. It's making it, and you talked about it's making it very hard. When you see, am I way off base where an experiential, all your background in the law, everything you've done from a work time. I remember work papers too, work permit. I was 14. I had to get my work papers. Yeah. You know what I mean? My mom had to sign it. Yeah. Yep. She had to sign it for me to work at McDonald's in the supermarket. How do people get more involved in politics? Because I agree with you. Because I talk to people all the time. They're like, what do you want me to do? Like, I'm in Connecticut. They go, I'm not even going to vote. And I go, my vote doesn't matter. And I'm like, and you're much better at answering. So help me as a businessman get all these men and women that listen to me and get on here understand how important it is and how they get involved in politics.
Well, if you say to people, don't you get sick and tired of the loudest voices in the room getting everything they want, or the loudest, craziest voices in the country getting everything they want? The reason they're getting it is because you're not doing anything. And you know what? The person who's not doing anything is part of the silent majority. The big mouths are the minority. Correct. The majority, the people who think like you do, who work hard, who pay their taxes, who want to succeed, who want to go on a vacation, who want to maybe buy a business one day, they're not getting involved because they think someone's doing it for them. They're not. The people who are doing it are people who are interested in their own self-promotion, in power, in money. And I don't want to get political here, but you know what? At least when I'm on Fox News, okay, and I'm on a show called The Five, which is the #1 show in all cable.
Unbelievable.
And I get to say whatever I want. Mm-hmm. I get to say it with someone else who disagrees with me. Yep. And we talk it out. It's important to be educated. Turn on the television and watch a show. Listen to the radio. Be careful of social media because the algorithms are following what you believe in. Okay, you've got to research, you've got to think about and go into areas that you wouldn't necessarily go into. If you listen to just one thing, you're going to be naive as to the other options or other situations out there. And I know that, people will say I'm only one person, but they need to understand. You live in New York City. Who's getting prosecuted in New York City? Danny Penny, a guy like you, a former Marine who is on a subway car that is literally moving underground with a crazy man saying, I'm ready to die. I'm ready to whatever it was he said, I'm ready to die. I don't care what happens to me. And Danny Penny protects everyone on that train. And the lawyers in that case are two former assistant DAs who work for me. And they said to me, boss, Everyone on that train was afraid for their life. The DA is prosecuting him while people are dying in New York City. They're dying in the subways. Nobody is taking charge. This is not a DA for all people. This is a DA for the leftist progressives. He's prosecuting Donald Trump on a case that's so beyond the statute of limitations, where Donald Trump now, we know from the Supreme Court, has immunity.
Yep.
And he's not helping the ordinary person. Vote for the DA. Vote for a guy who believes in truth and justice and law and order and right and wrong. Vote for someone who was on the school board, who believes your kids shouldn't be reading about oral sex if they're 8 years old with another kid. And don't talk to me about banning books when I want to ban a book for my grandson from seeing how you perform oral sex on another kid. You know, this is stuff that infuriates all of the ordinary, normal people. But they don't make the connection to politics, where if they get involved, they can stop it. You know, they just accept it. You can't. You can't accept it. Life is really what you make it for yourself and what you make it for your children and your grandchildren. Do you have children?
21 and 23-year-old, boy and a girl.
Okay, well, they're right there on the cusp. They're getting ready to leave. You know, what do you feel good about the economy out there? Do you feel good about the America's standing in the world?
No.
You know, we just
I don't feel good about their safety.
Yeah.
I teach them best I can, but I don't feel good about the fact that exactly what you talked about. And I tell my kids all the time that I will overreact before underreact. And I will make sure that you're safe. I shouldn't have to be the one. We're supposed to be able to rely that there's some law and order. But no, I don't feel good about those things.
They've defunded police.
Correct.
Police are afraid to take action because they're going to get sued. In New York City, the city council has basically made it easier to sue a police officer who makes an arrest. So what do you think his choice is going to be? Not to arrest.
Understood.
And these cops want to, just like you wanted to. They want to do the right thing. They want to make an arrest. They see the difference between right and wrong, and they're prevented from doing it. You know, there's a lot that we can do to change this world. And, you know, I don't want any namby-pambies. You know, we've got candidates who don't even tell us what they think or what they believe. You know, and it's up to us to, you know, draw a line in the sand. You know, Hamas. How dare you prevent Jewish kids from going into a classroom where they pay $70,000 a year? How dare you, as the DA, let everyone who broke into that building in the, where was it? Is it Columbia?
Columbia.
At Columbia, and broke the glass. Just it reminded me of Kristallnacht, and I'm not even Jewish. And the DA drops the charges for all the trespassers, and they assaulted the people working in the building. The DA dropped the charges. That's not what we need in this country. We need people who understand right from wrong.
Correct. And what would have happened if I was walking through the university and they tried to prevent me from going somewhere, and all the men that were in the area, I smacked the shit out of them in a Christian kind of way.
You'd be arrested.
I'd be arrested.
You would be
I'd be
arrested.
public enemy number one.
That's right.
Everywhere.
That's right.
But also, we have, and you said this at the beginning of your remarks, we can all speak our minds.
Yeah.
Every one of us. You don't have to scream and yell and have a meltdown when somebody doesn't agree with you. Matter of fact, when I went to school, we had a debate class. That was the goal. Like, you and I don't agree. They give me a topic I might not even support, and we debate it.
Yeah.
And then at the end, we don't hate each other.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I used to say when I coached for years, I say to the guys, sometimes you all just going to have to go out in the parking lot and fight.
Yeah.
You're both the same age, you're both dudes, just go out in the parking lot and fight. Now, because then you become friends. Then it's like you come back and you grab a beer and life is good. I fought most of my good friends. That's what you do.
Yeah.
I want to talk about something that's not okay when it comes to fighting. And it is, to me, it is domestic violence. I'm confused. I've never understood. I'm respectful of everybody feeling how they feel, believing what they believe, and all that until it crosses a line. Like if my daughter was 8 and I went into a bathroom and a dude walked in the bathroom, I would throw that dude out the window by his head. Okay?
You
and then I'd probably get arrested.
That's a crime.
I'm just telling you I would do it. And then you all would prosecute me. That'd
Yes.
be fine. I'd be like, I'm under arrest. I'm totally good. And if I go there next Tuesday and he's there, I'm going to do it again, and y'all can arrest me again. That's what's going to happen.
Yep.
The Olympics.
Oh, the boxing.
Jeanine, I watched, and I'm sick to my stomach.
You should be.
somehow when it was other sports, it was still so wrong. But it was like, okay, it's lack of competition. It's not fair in swimming. I get all that. But once it was physical combat and I saw that, I was sick to my... How in the world, in today's world, and I've not heard anybody in the current administration condemn any of it.
They
not
won't,
at all.
And they won't.
How did we get here? How are we watching a man beat up a woman?
The way we got here was by being silent and not making sure that we have legislators that pass laws, and here we go into politics again, that prevent transgenders from competing in women's sports. Do you have two girls?
Boy and a girl.
A boy and a girl. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But you had a girl, okay?
Yeah.
If your daughter worked from the time she was 5 years old to skate, and she's a fantastic skater, and she can go into the Olympics or a swimmer or anything else, should a guy have the right to beat her, take away all her dreams, her hopes and ambitions? Of course not. Of course not. This is worse. We're talking about combat.
Correct.
We're talking about boxing. Now, it's been a long time since I studied biology, but girls have the XX chromosome, guys have the XY chromosome.
Correct.
Two guys in the Olympics, two people, in the Olympics have the XY chromosome. They are fighting as girls in boxing. I don't know why they're fighting as girls. One young woman was in the ring 46 seconds and said she was hit like she'd never been hit before because she was hit by a guy. Okay? The next girl said, I'm going to be strong. I'm going to do it. She thought she was going to prove that, she was the best. She got knocked out. Did she get knocked out, or did he beat her?
He
beat her in very short time.
Correct.
Now, these two guys were prevented from boxing by the International Association of Boxing, or the Fraternal Order of Boxing, or something. Someone on the Five said to me, well, they're a corrupt organization. I said, well, maybe they're corrupt according to you, but they sound perfectly sensible to me.
Correct.
Now, if you have there's something called DSD, and it stood for some differing sexual something. I don't give a damn.
Yep.
Fight with other people who have DSDs. You do not fight my daughter. You do not knock her out in 46 seconds. You do not have the right to be in this game. Get your own lane. That goes for the transgenders, for the ones with a different sexual whatever. You do not take away the dreams of young girls and the years that they worked. What they're doing is they're erasing women, they're canceling women, and they're telling women that they don't matter. And I'm sick of it. And you know what? If the National Organization of Women, or if the women on the left weren't so protective of their leftist ideology, this would never happen, because all women would be in agreement. But they're not, because they're too interested in the left and not interested in their femalehood.
Well, first of all, thank you for that.
Thank you.
I can't imagine, and I'm not a female, so I can't, but any female's like, that's okay. Like you said, I can't imagine my daughter, she was competing her whole life. I can't imagine all of a sudden she gets beat in a competition after she can't, like, and listen, I love my son with all my heart and soul. If he was like, here's how I feel, I'd be like, I support you, no matter what.
Yeah.
But if you decide you're going to compete in a sport, you're not going to. And if you go in a ring and hit a girl, I'm going to drop you. So you don't have to worry about fighting, because you'll be dropped before the fight starts. There'll be no fight, because there'll just be that person and you won't be able to fight. I want to end with this, because people ask me this all the time, and you're the perfect person to ask. You're an unbelievable speaker.
I am? Thank you.
I think so. You're an unbelievable speaker. You're unbelievably communicative. You speak with passion. You're direct. And a lot of the folks that I encounter, we go to meetings, and I like to get in the crowd and talk to them, and I'll go do you have any questions? And nobody does. And then you got to wait a little bit. Like if you were to say, if I was in the Five and you were like, I'd ask a million. Like I have plenty of questions. And
clearly,
if you don't like it, clearly, sorry,
yeah.
but I do.
Yeah.
What's your advice? Because a lot of the folks that I meet with, and they pull me and say, I want to do whatever they want to do in life.
Yeah.
Maybe they want to go to law school. Maybe they want another job. Maybe they want to run a company. Maybe they're trying to be a better coach. They're like, I don't do that well speaking in front of groups of people, and I'm trying to get better at it. Man, I have a lot to say. I get nervous. I'm uncomfortable. I don't know where to go. You clearly aren't nervous regarding anything or around anybody.
Yeah.
How did they help? How did you develop that? Mom's a model. Dad's running his business. It's not like they were traveling the country speaking in front of groups and you were watching.
No.
How did you, that tenacity of, hey, guys, go on your date. I'm going to do this. And then the whole sly, like, hey, you did. Where did that come from in you, and how can people pull that for themselves?
I don't know, but well, maybe let me guess. I kept getting pushback from the time I wanted to be a lawyer when I was like 6 or 8 years old. People would say to me, what do you want to be? And then the little girls with pigtails, and, I want to be a lawyer. No, don't you want to be a mommy? Don't you want to be I got married. It took me 10 years to have kids. I didn't think you could do both. No, that's a joke. It was getting the pushback. I've gotten pushback most of my life. I don't fight like you fight, but there's a fight and a passion inside of me. And the more they said I couldn't be a lawyer, the more I made sure I was on law review. The more the guys in class said, you're never going to get a job because no one's going to hire you, the more, I wanted. The more, they said women can't go for the jugular. I had to prove that I could and that I would, and I did. And by the way, I became the DA. I became their boss. I became a judge. It was because they said I couldn't. And it was this fight inside of me that I couldn't exhibit it the way you did physically, but I did it internally. And if you believe in what you're saying, if you believe in yourself, if you think about what you're going to say, and now I don't. Now I just talk. But if you are trying to figure out the best way to speak in front of an audience, what you need to do is sit down and write it down so that you don't stumble. You need to look at it and stand in front of a mirror and read it. Read it. And read it like nobody's there, because nobody is there. And then you've got to say it. Memorize it. And then read it, and then memorize it and speak it again. You know what? Nobody in that audience can touch you. No one in that audience is going to do anything to you. They're sitting there listening to you. You're not listening to them. So make sure that you know what you're going to say. Make sure you have a message. Make sure you believe it, because if you don't believe it, you're a failure from the get-go, because they'll know you don't believe it. You can get that. You can attract it. I was the first kid in my family to go to college. Are you kidding? It wasn't like that. So I love to speak. I do. And I love to try cases, and I miss it terribly.
Do you?
When I became the DA, it was terrible, because I had to run an office that tried 40,000 cases a year, which meant there were a lot of decisions. Do what you love. Do whatever your passion tells you to, and you'll never work a day in your life. Never. You'll have fun. That's what I did. And I'm still having fun. And I'm no spring chicken.
I could listen to you talk for hours.
You're very
Judge
kind.
Jeanine, I really
We could talk a lot about social work.
We could.
I mean, I got stories and you got stories.
I can only imagine.
Yes.
Thank
you, though.
No, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. Guys, thanks for jumping on Close and Conquer. Like, subscribe, share. I'm sure you're already following Judge Jeanine everywhere. Continue to do so. And that was, whether she believes it or not, what she was talking about on every level will help you in so many ways, and also your business. Because I'm thinking, if you were my football coach, I would have played harder, because that was motivating.
Yeah.
And I mean it. So appreciate y'all. Thanks again, Judge Jeanine.